He took my kids. He ran off with my sister, and I thought my life was over until the lawyer unsealed my father's will. The room went silent, and my heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. The only sound was the slow shuffle of papers sliding from that envelope. My husband leaned back with a smug smile, certain he had already won, while beside him sat my sister, the one person I trusted most, who betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. As those words from my father's will filled the air, everything began to change. And before I explain how that will turned my entire world upside down, you need to know how it all began. When I first met Daniel, I thought I had stumbled into the kind of love story you only see in movies. He was charming, confident, and he knew exactly how to make me feel like the most important person in the room. I wasn't used to that kind of attention. He'd sweep me off my feet with flowers delivered to my job, surprise dinners at restaurants I couldn't have afforded on my own, and long late night talks where he swore he had never met anyone who understood him the way I did. I remember our first real date. He held my hand across the table and said, "Sarah, you deserve the world. I don't know how your father raised such a strong woman, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to carry your burdens alone." Words like that sink deep, especially when you've been carrying quiet grief. I had just lost my dad, the one man who always believed in me, and here was Daniel, stepping into that empty space like a hero. For a while, I let myself believe in the fairy tale. After losing my dad, I had been desperate for stability, for someone who would stand beside me through the storms of life. Daniel made me feel like I could finally stop carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. With him, I felt safe. At least that's what I told myself. And then there was my sister, Lily. If I was the quiet, careful one, she was the bold, reckless spark that drew people in. She was my best friend, my other half growing up. We shared secrets, clothes, even silly dreams about our futures. I never imagined I would have to protect myself from her. Back then, I thought she would always be my safe place. And at first, she was supportive of my relationship with Daniel. She laughed at his jokes, encouraged me when I doubted myself, and even helped me plan parts of the wedding. It felt like I was gaining a husband and keeping my sister all at once. But looking back, there were cracks in the picture-perfect frame. They were small at first, so small I convinced myself they didn't matter. Daniel had this way of teasing me about my job. I worked as a teacher, pouring my heart into my students every single day. But to him, it was cute. Had laugh when I told him about a child's progress, like their victories weren't real compared to his business deals. At dinner parties with his colleagues, when someone asked what I did, he'd smile and say, "Oh, she just teaches. She keeps herself busy." Just. That word stung more than he knew, or maybe he did know, and he enjoyed the way it made me shrink into myself. Then there was Lily. She started coming around more often after I married Daniel. At first, I thought she was being the supportive sister, filling the emptiness after Dad's death. But sometimes I'd walk into the room, and the laughter between her and Daniel would stop too suddenly, as if I had interrupted a joke I wasn't meant to hear. Sometimes her compliments toward him felt too much. "You're so good with the kids, Daniel." "Wow, you always know the right thing to say." Brushed it off. She was my sister. She'd never hurt me, right? But then came the subtle shifts. Daniel started making decisions without me about our money, about where the kids would go to school, about vacations. When I pushed back, he'd smile, that condescending smile, and say, "Relax, I've got this. I know what's best for us." And Lily? She always seemed to agree with him. "He's right," she'd say. "You stress too much. Let him take care of things." At night, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I'd tell myself it was love. That's what a good husband does. He takes charge. He provides. I didn't realize that little by little he was erasing my voice from my own life. Still, there were moments when I felt something was off. One night, I found Daniel's phone buzzing on the counter. I glanced down and saw Lily's name flash across the screen. It was late, far too late for any casual chat. My stomach twisted. When I asked about it the next morning, Daniel laughed and said, "She just needed advice about something. Don't be so paranoid." And I wanted to believe him, so I did. But that night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling back. What did they talk about? Why was she calling him instead of me? The more I thought about it, the more my chest tightened with something I didn't want to name. Suspicion. The truth? Deep down, I knew something wasn't right, but I was terrified to admit it to myself, because if I did, I would have to face the possibility that my perfect marriage wasn't perfect at all, and that my sister, the one person I thought would always protect me, might not have been standing beside me, but behind me, waiting for the right moment to push. So I ignored the signs. I held onto the image of the family I wanted so badly to believe in, the husband who loved me, the sister who supported me, and the kids who needed me to keep our world together. But sometimes when you ignore the cracks long enough, they don't just stay small. They grow until the whole foundation gives way, and mine was about to collapse in ways I could never have imagined. At first, it looked like love wearing a helping hand. Lily showed up with casseroles and extra diapers. She folded laundry while we bathed the kids. She'd say, "You look tired, let me take the morning drop off," and it'd feel seen, supported, grateful. Grief after Dad's death had left a hollow place in me. Lily filled it with noise and motion, errands, jokes, playlists, a busy kind of care that kept me from thinking too hard about the silence between Daniel and me. But the quiet spaces don't vanish, they widen. Daniel started staying later at work. "Quarter end," he'd say, tossing his jacket on a chair, kissing the top of my head like a habit. "Investors are jumpy." His phone lived face down on the counter, screen lighting up like a heartbeat. Sometimes it'd catch a flicker of Lily's name before he swept it away with his thumb, smiling as if the message were a secret between them that didn't cost me anything. I told myself we were a team. Husband, wife, sister, 3 adults keeping a family afloat. I told myself nothing was wrong because admitting something was wrong would mean the fairy tale had teeth. The first nick was small, a Tuesday. I came home with glitter in my hair from a classroom art project, exhaustion tucked under my eyes. Lily was at our stove, barefoot, stirring sauce with Daniel leaning against the counter, laughing low at something she said. The kids were at the table, coloring. Domestic, warm, perfect. "Smells amazing," I said, setting my bag down. Lily turned, grinning. "Don't faint." I finally learned not to burn the garlic. Daniel winked at her. "A miracle. Mark the calendar." It should have been nothing. It should have been sweet. But the way they looked at each other like conspirators in a harmless crime left a splinter. Later, when the kids were in pajamas, I went to make lunches. The cutting board was still damp, the knife placed neatly in the rack. I reached for the phone, charging by the toaster, to check the time. It wasn't my phone. Daniel's wallpaper flashed alive, a photo of the 4 of us at the beach, and over it, a text preview. "Lily, don't forget, tomorrow. Same place." The splinter turned, I slid the phone back and told myself it was about errands, school supplies, groceries. Lily was always helping. I had asked for help, hadn't I? The second nick came a week later at the pediatrician's office. Our son had a stubborn cough. I was tying his shoe when the doctor mentioned the referral Daniel had requested for a specialist across town. "He said you'd follow up," she added, moving on to the growth chart. I stared at the paper, heat rising. I didn't know about a referral. "Oh," she blinked, surprised. He and Lily were very thorough. The world tilted a fraction. He and Lily. On the drive home, the kids argued about who got to press the elevator button. In the rearview mirror, I caught my own eye, tired, unsure, a woman rehearsing bravery in a small glass square. I called Daniel. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I called Lily. Straight to voicemail. A minute later, a text from Daniel. "In a meeting. Love you. Love you." The softest bandage on the deepest cut. That Friday, I left work early. A surprise for the kids' ice cream, a movie night. I turned the corner onto our street and saw Lily's car in the driveway. Of course, she had a key. Of course. I opened the door and froze. The living room looked staged, toys arranged in artful chaos, a blanket draped over the couch just so, and on the coffee table, 2 wine glasses with a lick of red at the bottom, a third, clean, sat beside them like an apology. "Hey." Lily's voice floated from the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway, hair up, Daniel's sweatshirt hanging loose around her shoulders. "Surprise!" I did a quick tidy. I stared at the glasses. Were we celebrating something? She followed my gaze, too casual. "We tried a new bottle, wanted to make sure it was good enough for you. We, Daniel and me." She said it like rain and forecast, obvious and harmless. He had a long day. Daniel walked in, loosening his tie, stopping when he saw me. You're early. Is that a problem? He kissed my cheek. Never. Later, while the kids watched their movie, I found them in the laundry room whispering. They stopped when I walked in, smiles stiff, like masks borrowed in a hurry. I leaned against the dryer. If there's something I need to know, say it. Daniel slipped into ease. We were talking about the fundraiser Lily's planning for the school. You know, so you don't have to carry everything. I don't carry everything. Lily's smile gentled. You try to. It's why we love you. Let us help. Help. A word that started to taste like metal. The next few days had an odd shine. Daniel was attentive. Lily was buoyant. The kids picked up new phrases I hadn't taught them. Daddy says you worry too much. Aunt Lily says you should rest more. Aunt Lily says Daddy is the best at fixing things. On Sunday, my daughter left her tablet on the counter. A message pinged her kids' chat where they traded stickers and emojis. I glanced at it, smiling at a cartoon dog in sunglasses. Another ping. A photo dropped into the thread. Daniel pushing a grocery cart with Lily perched on the edge, laughing. Caption: Teamwork makes the dream work. The kids sent hearts, so many hearts. I pressed my hand flat on the counter to steady myself. It was just a photo. People shop together. People laugh. The truth is never in one picture. It hides in patterns. I tried to talk to Daniel that night. I want to feel like we're making decisions together, I said, voice measured. About the kids, about appointments, about everything. He didn't look up from his laptop. We are. You and Lily asked for a referral. You and Lily planned the fundraiser. You and Lily. He closed the laptop with a sigh. You're inventing drama because you're overwhelmed. I am overwhelmed. With being left out. You weren't left out. You were busy. We kept things moving. You should be grateful. Grateful. The world's most polished gag. I turned to leave. He added, lighter, practiced, and if you're jealous of me spending time with your sister, say that. Don't dress it up as something else. Jealous. He tossed the word like lint. I carried it like lead up the stairs. I tried talking to Lily the next day. We met at the coffee shop near the school she loved because the barista called her sunshine. I ordered tea, hands trembling. I feel strange, I said carefully. About how close you and Daniel have gotten. I keep finding out things secondhand. She reached across the table, warm, sisterly. I hate that you feel that way. I would never hurt you. I know. But then I find 2 wine glasses on the table, or the doctor says you asked for a referral, or I see a picture of you and Daniel shopping. She laughed, soft. We grabbed groceries because you texted you'd be late. My point is, I don't want to be managed. I want to be included. Her face softened, pity masquerading as compassion. You've been under so much stress, after Dad and with work. Maybe you should talk to someone. I'm talking to you. Then hear me, she said, squeezing my hand. We love you. Daniel loves you. I love you. Let us carry some of this. Don't make enemies where there are none. I walked home with that sentence chewing me from the inside. Don't make enemies where there are none. But enemies don't always look like villains. Sometimes they look like help. The night after Lily's warning about not making enemies, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake with the ceiling pressing down on me, listening to Daniel's breathing, steady, unbothered, the kind of breathing that belonged to a man with no guilt at all. My heart, though, refused to rest. Every laugh they'd shared, every glance too long, every hushed conversation I'd walked in on played back in my mind like a reel I couldn't stop. I turned over again and again, clutching my pillow until my hands cramped, wishing for silence inside my own head. But silence never came, only the growing weight of a word I still couldn't bring myself to say out loud, betrayal. The next morning, I moved through life as if I were sleepwalking. I packed sandwiches with shaky hands, braided my daughter's hair while forcing a smile, kissed my son's forehead, though my lips trembled. The children laughed, innocent, oblivious, while my stomach turned to stone. I told myself it was stress, that I was paranoid, that grief had twisted my vision. But somewhere in the pit of me, I knew the truth. Something had been stolen from me already, and worse was coming. It was a Thursday when the world finally collapsed. I had just finished grading papers after school, red pen marks still fresh on my fingertips, when the doorbell rang. A courier stood on the porch with an envelope in his hand. His expression was neutral, rehearsed, like he'd delivered this kind of envelope 1,000 times before. He didn't even meet my eyes, just asked for my signature, handed over the weight in his palm, and walked away without a word. The envelope was heavy, too heavy. It felt less like paper and more like a weapon. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at my name typed neatly across the front. My pulse hammered. I knew before I even touched it that nothing good waited inside. My hands trembled as I slid a finger under the seal, tearing it open, pulling out pages that seemed endless, each one sharper than the last. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. My chest clamped shut, each breath a fight. At the bottom of the first page, Daniel's signature mocked me in that familiar looping script, the same signature I had once admired on love letters, on birthday cards, on the deed to our first home. Now it was cold, distant, legal, a blade drawn clean across the life we had built. And then I saw it. In the section marked proposed alternate caregiver, my sister's name, Lily. The papers slipped from my hands and scattered across the table like ash from a fire. My knees buckled, and I clung to the edge of the wood to keep from collapsing. My husband wasn't just trying to rip my children out of my arms. He was doing it hand in hand with the person who had shared my childhood bedroom, my secrets, my blood, my sister. The front door creaked open minutes later. I hadn't even heard his car in the driveway. Daniel walked in, humming softly, casual, as though nothing in the world was broken. He froze when his eyes caught the envelope on the table, the papers spread out in plain view. His face went pale for just a second, then calm again, collected, as if he'd been preparing for this moment all along. "So," I whispered, voice cracked and trembling, "this is how you tell me?" He placed his keys on the counter and stepped forward with the quiet confidence of a man who thought he held all the power. "It's for the best, Sarah, you know it." "For the best?" The words ripped out of me raw. "For the best to tear our children away from me? To run off with my sister? That's what you call best?" His jaw clenched. A flicker of guilt quick, almost hidden, passed over his face before the mask returned. "Lily and I, we understand each other. She's good with the kids. They'll be safe, stable. You've been struggling, Sarah. It's time to admit it." "Struggling?" I spat the word back at him. "I'm the one who stays up when they're sick. I'm the one who knows which stuffed animal has to be in their bed for them to sleep. I'm the one who shows up at every appointment, every recital, every scraped knee. And you dare call that struggling?" He tilted his head, eyes cold. "You're emotional. That's exactly why this is necessary. The kids need stability. With me, with Lily." The room spun. My anger rose like fire, but so did despair. I wanted to scream, to throw every plate in the kitchen, to make him feel a fraction of the pain clawing through me. Instead, my body betrayed me. I sank into a chair, clutching the papers to my chest, their edges cutting into my skin like knives I couldn't drop. "You planned this," I finally whispered, voice hoarse. "Every late night at work, every whisper I wasn't supposed to hear, every excuse. You planned it all." Daniel didn't deny it. He only sighed as if I were a child overreacting to spilled milk. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said flatly. "Sign the papers. Let's move forward." The next day, another envelope arrived. This one from his lawyer. A hearing date circled in red. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to fight for my children. 2 weeks to prepare for a war I never asked for, against a man I once trusted and a sister I once loved. That night, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat in the dark living room, holding a necklace I had found weeks ago, the one with Lily's initial on it. My chest ached with every beat of my heart. It wasn't just my husband I was losing. It wasn't just my children. It was my sister, too. The girl who once braided my hair, who once held my hand in thunderstorms, now stood on the other side of the battlefield. I wept until my throat burned, until the tears ran dry. But even as the darkness wrapped around me, a flicker stirred deep inside. Small, fragile, but alive. A spark whispering that I wasn't as powerless as Daniel wanted me to believe. That spark would grow, but not yet. For now, I let the storm inside me break open, mourning the family I thought I had, while somewhere beneath the rubble, something stronger waited, something my father had left behind, something sealed away for the day I would need it most. The days leading up to the custody hearing felt like I was moving through quicksand. Every step dragged me down further, every sound seemed distorted, like the world was happening on the other side of glass. I woke up each morning in the same bed I had once shared with Daniel, but now the mattress felt like an island of cold emptiness. Even the walls seemed to watch me as if they were tired of holding secrets I had been too blind to see. The photographs on the hallway wall, the ones where we posed as a smiling family, no longer felt like happy memories. They looked staged, fake, a cruel reminder that what I thought was real had been slipping away long before I noticed. Every corner of that house whispered betrayal, and every night I wondered if I would survive the next sunrise. But the hardest part wasn't Daniel, it wasn't even Lily. It was the distance I began to feel from my children. At first, they were confused, their little voices asking questions that cut me open. Why isn't Daddy home? Is Aunt Lily going to stay with us again? I wanted to scream the truth, to tell them that their father had chosen my sister over me, that everything safe and familiar had been ripped apart. But how do you explain treachery to children whose only crime was loving too much? So I swallowed my pain and gave them soft lies. Daddy is just busy right now. Aunt Lily is helping while things get settled. Each false smile, each gentle excuse chipped away at my heart. Then came the manipulation. Daniel twisted their innocent minds into weapons I couldn't defend against. When they returned from visits, they carried his poison on their tongues. Daddy says you're always sad. Daddy says Aunt Lily's house is more fun. My daughter's eyes dimmed when she told me that Aunt Lily said I worried too much. It was like watching their love for me being sanded down piece by piece until I feared there would be nothing left. By the time the hearing arrived, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I walked into the courtroom with trembling hands, holding onto my lawyer's arm as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. Daniel was already there, dressed to perfection, sitting with confidence beside his attorney. Lily sat just behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder in a mock gesture of support. The sight of them together, the man I had trusted, and the sister I had loved nearly knocked the breath out of me. They looked like a united front. I looked like the abandoned one, which was exactly how they wanted me to appear. Daniel's lawyer wasted no time. He painted me as unstable, unfit, too fragile to raise two children. He dragged out every late bill, every missed doctor's appointment, every day I had taken off work while drowning in grief over my father's death. Flaws that should have been forgiven as human were twisted into proof that I was incompetent. His words sliced into me like knives, turning my exhaustion into a story of negligence, my tears into weakness. When it was finally my turn, I rose to speak, my knees barely holding me steady. My voice shook as I told the judge about my children, not about Daniel, not about Lily, but about the two little souls who meant everything to me. I spoke about the way my son's eyes lit up when he talked about dinosaurs, the way my daughter sang herself to sleep with lullabies she half remembered, the way I had kissed, scraped knees, and wiped away tears for years. But my words felt small against the polished performance. Daniel and his lawyer had delivered. The judge's ruling wasn't final, but it felt like a death sentence all the same. Daniel was granted temporary primary custody until the case could be reviewed further. Temporary. A single word, but it echoed in my chest like a bell tolling doom. Temporary meant my babies would live with him and Lily. Temporary meant I was reduced to weekend visits, a guest in my children's lives. I left the courthouse that day hollow, the world around me blurring into meaningless shapes. The city traffic hummed, strangers brushed past me, but none of it reached me. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. For the first time, I realized that betrayal wasn't just something you survived, it was something that reshaped you, crushed you until even your own children started slipping through your hands. That night, I sat in their empty bedrooms, surrounded by stuffed animals that still smelled faintly of bubble bath and crayons. I clutched their toys like they were lifelines, rocking myself in the silence that used to be filled with laughter. The ache was unbearable. It wasn't just that Daniel and Lily had taken them, it was that they had convinced the world I wasn't enough. But just when the darkness felt unending, a thread of light appeared. It came in the form of a phone call. My lawyer, Margaret, spoke with a calmness that cut through my despair. "Sarah," she said gently, "you need to come in. There's something about your father's estate that we need to discuss." Confusion twisted in my chest. My father had died years ago. He hadn't been a wealthy man. He was hardworking, steady, always modest in what he left behind. I couldn't imagine what his estate had to do with the nightmare I was living now. Then Margaret's voice lowered, almost as if she was letting me in on a secret. "Your father left behind a sealed will. It hasn't been opened yet, and I believe what's inside could change everything." I froze. My father, the man who had always stood by me, who had taught me strength through quiet acts of love, had one more card to play. One last gift. For the first time in weeks, something stirred inside me that felt dangerously close to hope. Maybe, just maybe, my father had left me, not just memories, but a weapon I didn't know I had. And maybe that sealed envelope was the key to bringing my children back home. I drove to Margaret's office with my heart pounding so hard it felt like the steering wheel itself was shaking beneath my hands. For weeks I had been buried alive in grief, anger, and exhaustion, clawing through each day without light. But that single phrase she'd spoken, "Your father's estate," ignited a spark I thought was gone. Hope. Fragile, flickering, but alive. When I stepped into her office, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Margaret sat behind her polished wooden desk, glasses perched low on her nose, a neat stack of files spread before her. She greeted me with calm professionalism, but her eyes carried something deeper warmth, steadiness, an unspoken promise that she saw me as more than a broken woman in the middle of a custody war. She looked at me as if I was worth saving. "Sarah," she said, sliding a thick folder toward me, "your father was more prepared than you may realize. Before he passed, he left behind a sealed will. It's been held in trust until certain conditions were met." Her words sank slowly, almost too heavy to hold. I frowned. Why would he keep something like that from me? Dad wasn't complicated. He worked hard, paid bills, fixed things with his hands. He wasn't the kind of man to hide secrets. Margaret gave a small smile. Simple, yes, but not foolish. Sometimes the quietest men think the furthest ahead. I reached out with trembling fingers and touched the folder. It felt heavier than paper should, like it carried not just ink and signatures, but my father's presence, his voice, his wisdom, his love. I hesitated to open it. "Before you read," Margaret said softly, "tell me about him. What did he mean to you?" Her question caught me off guard, but I welcomed it like air after drowning. Memories rushed forward, the smell of motor oil clinging to his jacket, the sound of his laugh echoing across a quiet kitchen, the way his rough hands softened when they held mine. "He wasn't rich," I whispered, my throat tightening, "but he was steady. He taught me that worth isn't about money, it's about character. He always said family was everything. After Mom died, he worked himself to the bone to raise Lily and me. He never let me doubt I was loved, not once." My voice broke on the last word. Speaking about him in past tense felt like tearing open an old wound. Margaret leaned forward, her tone low, reassuring. "Sarah, I believe your father knew there might come a time when you'd need protection. He left behind more than memories." With that, she nudged the folder closer. My hands shook as I opened it. At the top was his will typewritten, stamped with the court seal and bearing his name in bold letters that seemed to carry his presence into the room. As I read, my vision blurred with tears. He had left me his land, the small piece of property I'd always dismissed as worthless, with its leaning barn and patchy soil. But tucked inside was an appraisal report. According to county records, natural gas deposits ran beneath it. That land wasn't worthless. It was potentially worth millions. My hand flew to my mouth as the words sank in. "That's not all," Margaret said, pulling out another document. "Your father also created a trust in your name. It's been compounding for years. Investments, dividends, interest. Sarah, it's worth more than $2 million. I shook my head in disbelief. No, no, that can't be real. Dad lived paycheck to paycheck. Margaret's eyes softened. He lived modestly, yes, but he was careful. He planned. And everything he built for you. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I realized the truth. My father had been gone for years, yet here he was, still protecting me, still reaching across the impossible distance to give me strength. Even in death, he hadn't stopped being my shield. But the will carried something even more powerful: clauses. My father had written protections into his estate, stating that if anyone married to me or, related by blood ever, attempted to deceive or harm me, they would be automatically disinherited. The land, the trust, the assets, they were mine, untouchable. My breath caught. You mean yes, Margaret said firmly. Your husband has no claim. Your sister has no claim. In fact, their betrayal only strengthens your position. Your father designed this inheritance to shield you from exactly what's happening now. The room spun as the truth sank in. For weeks, I had been powerless, cornered by Daniel's lies and Lily's betrayal. But my father, quiet, humble, ordinary dad, had seen further ahead than any of us. He had left me not just money, but armor, a weapon, a legacy designed to protect me when I couldn't protect myself. I closed my eyes, whispered through tears, "Thank you, Dad." When I opened them, I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that office. I was still bruised, still grieving, but no longer powerless. My father had given me the one thing I needed most: the means to fight back. With Margaret by my side, I was ready. The next battle wouldn't just be about survival. It would be about reclaiming everything they had tried to take from me, including my children. The days that followed felt like I was walking on trembling ground. For so long, I had been stripped of control, forced to play the role of victim in Daniel and Lily's cruel game. I had lived in silence, swallowing their betrayal like poison, believing I had no way to fight back. But now, with my father's will in hand, the ground beneath me was shifting, not under my feet, but under theirs. For the first time, I wasn't the one cornered. For the first time, I wasn't on defense. Margaret spread the documents across her desk like pieces of a puzzle only she knew how to solve. Her movements were precise, deliberate, as if she had been preparing for this battle long before I even walked into her office. She pointed at each clause with her pen, her voice calm but sharp, like a surgeon explaining where the cut would be made before pressing the scalpel. This, she said, tapping one line, invalidates Daniel's claim to community property. Your father foresaw the possibility of exploitation through marriage, and here she slid another paper toward Mayhay included a disinheritance clause for anyone who betrayed you, family or otherwise. The weight of those words struck me harder than I expected. My sister, my husband, two people who had worked together to break me, to humiliate me, to rob me of the only stability I thought I had left, now neatly written out of the equation by a man who wasn't even alive anymore. My father, quiet and steady in life, had turned into a protector even in death. Do you understand what this means, Sarah? Margaret asked, her voice low, almost reverent. I nodded slowly, clutching the folder to my chest like it was a lifeline. My hands trembled, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the shocking realization that the rules of the game had changed. It means he can't take everything. It means I still have something that's mine. Margaret's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that carried a spark of victory. It means more than that, Sarah. It means we can fight back. The thought scared me. Fighting back meant facing Daniel in court, facing Lily, facing the smug, taunting smirk I had seen on his face as he walked away with my children. It meant stepping into the lion's den with nothing but paper and truth. But then I thought of my father's hands, calloused from years of labor, and his voice echoing in my head, reminding me that strength isn't the absence of fear, it's standing anyway, even when fear tries to paralyze you. "Ill fight," I whispered. The words came out fragile at first, trembling on my lips, but with each breath, they grew stronger. For my kids, for my father, for myself. Margaret leaned back, a look of satisfaction settling over her face. Good. Because Daniel thinks he's won. He thinks you'll walk into court humiliated, stripped of everything, and leave with nothing. But what he doesn't know, what neither of them knows, is that your father's will changes everything. We're not just defending you, Sarah. We're going to turn the tables. Her words ignited something inside me that I thought had been buried forever fire. Not just the will to survive, but the determination to reclaim what was mine. A burning resolve that no matter how long the road, no matter how bitter the fight, I would no longer live as their victim. The preparation began immediately. Margaret and her team gathered financial records, property appraisals, investment reports, and witness statements. Each document was another weapon, another piece of armor to guard me against the lies Daniel had crafted so carefully. The truth wasn't just on my side, it was written in black ink, notarized, stamped by the court. My father's legacy had become my sword and shield. But even as we built the case, doubt clung to me like a shadow. At night, when the house was too quiet, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the sound of my children's laughter echoing faintly in my memory. I wondered if they hated me for not being there. I wondered if Daniel poisoned their thoughts, if Lily whispered lies to them about me not caring, about me abandoning them. Those questions stabbed deeper than any of Daniel's words ever could. Every morning, I woke with that ache in my chest, but then I would force myself to remember the line etched into my father's will. Everything I built for you. And with that reminder, I dragged myself out of bed, even when my knees wanted to buckle. One evening, as the court date drew closer, Daniel called. His voice was dripping with mockery, every syllable soaked in arrogance. I hope you're not wasting money on lawyers, Sarah. You know how this ends. You have nothing, and soon you won't even have visitation. His words cut deep, sharper than knives, but this time I didn't let him hear me break. We'll see, I said simply, and then I hung up. For the first time, it was him who didn't have the final word. When I told Margaret about the call, she smirked, her eyes flashing with a spark of something fierce. Let him think he's won. It'll make the reveal all the more devastating. The reveal. Those two words began to echo in my head like a drumbeat. The secret in my father's will wasn't just protection, it was a time bomb. And in that courtroom, in front of the judge, Daniel and Lily would have nowhere to run when it exploded. I thought back to the day Daniel left the slam of the door, my children's small hands slipping from mine, Lily's triumphant smirk. That memory had haunted me every night, carved itself into my bones. But now, another image began to form, Daniel's face cracking, his arrogance shattering as Margaret read the will out loud for the court to hear. I promised myself I would see that moment, no matter the cost, no matter how long it took. The stage was set, the pieces were in motion. The will was no longer just paper, it was a shield, a sword, and a promise from my father that I was not alone. And as the court date drew near, I realized something profound. Daniel had taken my kids, my trust, my peace, but he hadn't taken me, not all the way. Deep inside, my father's love had been waiting, steady and unbreakable, to pull me back onto my feet. The day of the courtroom showdown was coming, and this time it wouldn't be me on trial. It would be him. The morning of the trial, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for a fleeting second I felt that old weight pressing down on me, the suffocating loneliness, the ache of abandonment. But then my eyes fell on the folder resting on my kitchen table, my father's will, Margaret's meticulous notes, evidence that I wasn't walking into that courtroom empty-handed, proof that I wasn't powerless anymore. That folder was more than paper, it was my shield. I dressed carefully, almost ritualistically. Each button I fastened, each strand of hair I smoothed back, was a declaration of war. Not because I cared what Daniel thought or what Lily would whisper from across the aisle, but because I wanted to feel strong. I wanted to walk into that courtroom looking like someone who refused to be broken. My father used to say, "How you present yourself is how they'll remember you." That morning, I wanted Daniel to remember me not as the trembling woman he left behind, but as someone unshaken, unmovable, and unafraid. When I arrived at the courthouse, Margaret was already waiting, standing tall in her navy suit. She gave me a firm nod, her calmness steadying me. "Today, we take back what's yours," she said softly. Her confidence settled into me like armor. I drew a deep breath and followed her inside, each step echoing like a drumbeat in my chest. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension, heavy enough to choke on. Daniel sat at the opposite table, dressed in his finest suit, smugness radiating from every inch of him. Lily was beside him, her hand on his arm like some grotesque badge of victory. She didn't even look at me, but I felt her presence burning at the edge of my vision. She wanted me to feel small, to feel erased, but I refused to shrink. Daniel smirked when his eyes met mine. That same arrogant curl of his lips I had once mistaken for charm now made my stomach twist. He leaned over, whispered something to Lily, and they both chuckled softly. It was a dagger to the chest, sharp and mocking, but I lifted my chin, held my head high, and reminded myself I wasn't here to win their approval. I was here to end their game. The judge entered, and the entire room rose in unison. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I stood tall. This was it. Years of betrayal, months of fear, days of sleepless nights all funneling into this single moment. The opposing lawyer, Daniel's hand-picked shark, wasted no time tearing into me. He painted me as fragile, unstable, incapable of caring for my own children. He spoke words like abandonment, financial incompetence, and unsuitability as a parent. His voice was confident, rehearsed, each syllable crafted to cut me down. Daniel sat there nodding along, his lips twitching with satisfaction. Every word was a hammer striking against my chest, and yet I refused to flinch. When it was Margaret's turn, she rose with quiet authority. There was no rush, no nervousness in her tone. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm and measured, "we will demonstrate that not only has my client been a dedicated mother, but that she is the rightful heir to her late father's estate, an estate which, as we will show, fundamentally changes the financial standing of this divorce." I saw it then. Daniel's smirk faltered. Only slightly, just a crack in his mask, but enough for me to notice. Enough to remind me that arrogance can shatter. Margaret began her assault with precision. She presented the first documents, financial statements, trust records, letters from my father's attorney. Each one laid carefully on the judge's desk, each one a brick stacked neatly against Daniel's wall of lies. He shifted in his seat, his lawyer raised objections, but the judge overruled again and again. The tide was beginning to turn, slow but steady. Still, the tension in the room was suffocating, like a rope being pulled tighter and tighter around all of us. Everyone was waiting for the breaking point, waiting for the hammer blow, waiting for the moment the truth would explode into the open. And deep in my chest, I knew exactly what that moment would be, the unsealing of the will. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. Part of me wanted it revealed immediately, wanted to rip the mask off Daniel and watch his arrogance crumble in front of the world. But Margaret was deliberate. She wanted the reveal to land like thunder loud, undeniable, and devastating. As the proceedings stretched on, Daniel grew restless. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The smirk was gone now, replaced by cracks in his confidence. Lily sat stiff beside him, her spine straight, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles turned pale. The smug victory she wore like perfume had vanished. Now she looked like a woman bracing for impact. Finally, Margaret turned to the judge, her voice steady as stone. "Your Honor, at this time, I would like to present into evidence the sealed last will and testament of the late Mr. Robert Hayes." The courtroom froze. A silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums filled the space. You could hear the shuffle of papers stop mid-motion. The pens in people's hands stilled. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Daniel froze in place, his lawyer stiffened, and Lily's breath hitched loud enough for me to hear. And me? My heart pounded so violently, I was sure the entire room could hear it. Every beat was a drum announcing the shift of power. The judge raised an eyebrow, curiosity sparking in his eyes. "The will has been sealed until this proceeding?" "Yes, Your Honor," Margaret replied smoothly, "and its contents are directly relevant to the financial division in this case." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The bailiff approached, carrying the envelope in gloved hands. Its seal was still unbroken, the wax mark intact. My eyes locked on it, unable to look away. That envelope held my father's voice, his foresight, his protection. It was the truth he had buried not out of secrecy, but out of love waiting for this exact moment. As the judge's hands broke the seal with a crisp, echoing tear, the air in the room shifted. It was no longer Daniel's game, no longer Lily's show of triumph. The balance of power was collapsing piece by piece, and every single person in that room knew it. The showdown had begun. The sound of the seal tearing was louder than any gavel it ever heard. It wasn't just paper breaking, it was the sound of years of manipulation, betrayal, and deceit about to collapse like glass under a hammer. My palms were damp against the wooden table, my breath shallow, my pulse thundering as I watched the judge slide those folded pages free from the envelope. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. The courtroom didn't breathe. Daniel leaned forward, his smug mask faltering as uncertainty crept into his eyes. Lily's nails dug into his arm like talons, her face pale but stubborn, as if sheer willpower could stop what was coming. Margaret leaned toward me, gave the smallest nod, calm, steady, reassuring, as though to remind me, this is your moment. Don't look away. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice solemn as he began to read. I, Robert Hayes, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my last will and testament. Hearing those words, I swear I felt my father in the room with me. His voice wasn't there, but it lived in those sentences. I could almost see him again at his desk, shoulders hunched, pen scratching across paper, carefully crafting each line. He wasn't just thinking about his estate. He was thinking about me, about the battles I didn't even know I would face, about the storm he knew might one day come. At first, it was simple formalities, acknowledgments, instructions for debts and minor possessions. Daniel relaxed visibly, slouching back in his chair. He exchanged a smirk with his lawyer, one of those smug little glances meant to say, "See, I told you, nothing here will save her." And then the turn. To my daughter, Sarah Hayes, the judge read, I leave full ownership of the Hayes family estate, including all attached lands, mineral rights, and any revenues derived therein. This inheritance is to be placed in an irrevocable trust under her sole name, not subject to marital division, prenup agreements, or third-party claims. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like a wave crashing onto shore. My ears rang as the words sank in: mineral rights, revenues, and irrevocable trust. My stomach dropped and then soared all at once. I had known about the land, yes, but not about what it contained, not about the fortune hidden beneath it. The judge's voice was steady, but the numbers he read next roared in my head like thunder. Said lands include, but are not limited to, the property located on Willow Creek, under which lie the verified deposits of natural gas presently leased and generating annual revenues of, he paused, eyes scanning the figure before speaking it aloud, millions of dollars, millions. That word struck me like lightning. My father hadn't just protected me, he had fortified me, shielded me with armor stronger than Daniel's lies. He had left me not only a home, but an empire. Across the aisle, Daniel's face drained of all color. The arrogant confidence, the smirk, the certainty that he would walk away with everything, it all collapsed in an instant. His lips parted, whispering frantically to his lawyer, but his lawyer's expression told the truth. There was no escape. The will was ironclad. His house of cards had fallen. Lily's grip slipped from his arm. She looked at me then, truly looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and something else, fear. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't the triumphant sister clinging to her prize. She was a spectator to her own unraveling. The judge pressed on. Furthermore, it is my express wish that this inheritance remain in my daughter's name alone, as I trust her judgment and strength above all else. My throat tightened. Tears blurred my vision, not from sadness, but from the fierce, unshakable love my father had managed to pour into those words. He had believed in me, even when I no longer believed in myself. He had seen the storm ahead and built me a fortress before it ever arrived, his faith wrapped around me like armor in that cold, unforgiving courtroom. When the judge finished, silence reigned. It was heavy, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Every person in that room felt the weight of those words. Every person knew the ground had shifted. Margaret rose slowly, her presence commanding, her voice sharp and deliberate. Your Honor, with this will unsealed, it is evident that the estate is not part of the marital assets and cannot be touched by the opposing party. It also demonstrates my client's financial stability, directly undermining the claims made against her ability to provide for her children. Daniel erupted. His hand slammed the table with a crack. This is ridiculous, he shouted, his face crimson, veins bulging at his neck. That money should be mine. I built her life. I supported enough. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, silencing the outburst. His glare cut Daniel down where he sat. You will not disrupt these proceedings again. Daniel collapsed into his chair, chest heaving, his composure shattered beyond repair. His mask was gone, and in that moment, the courtroom saw him clearly for what he truly was: not a stable provider, not a caring husband, but a man who had tried to strip me of everything and failed. I sat straighter. For the first time in months, power pulsed through me, not from money, not from vengeance, but from the truth itself standing in my corner. The will had done more than unearth wealth. It had unearthed justice. And as I looked across at Daniel and Lily, both of them pale, trembling, stripped of their illusions, I knew this was far from over. But the tide had turned. The unsealing of my father's will had changed everything. The courtroom felt different after the will was read. The air was heavier now, charged with a tension that clung to everyone in the room. The balance had shifted, and Daniel knew it. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his mask of confidence slipping away with every breath. Lily sat stiff beside him, her eyes darting between me, the judge, and the pages of the will, as though she were desperately searching for some hidden escape route that didn't exist. Margaret seized the moment like a warrior. She rose gracefully, her presence commanding, her voice slicing through the silence. Your Honor, this will does more than prove financial stability. It exposes motive. The opposing party has been maneuvering under false pretenses, attempting to manipulate these proceedings for personal gain. My client's husband not only abandoned her and their children, but he did so while conspiring with her own sister. Knowing this inheritance existed, the words landed like thunder. Gasps erupted from the gallery, whispers flying like sparks across dry brush. Even the court reporter glanced up from her keys, her composure faltering for the first time. Daniel bolted upright, red-faced, his voice cracking. That's a lie. I didn't know about the gas deposits. Margaret didn't flinch. She took a step closer, her tone cool but sharp as steel. And yet you pressured my client to sign a prenup that coincidentally excluded all family property. You knew. Perhaps not the full scope, but you knew enough to try and trap her. The judge leaned back in his chair, folding his hands as his gaze settled on Daniel like a hammer waiting to drop. Is there truth to this claim? Daniel sputtered, words tripping over one another. Two only wanted what was fair. I gave her everything. She was nothing without me. That sentence echoed through the courtroom like a death knell. I saw it in the eyes of the jury, the clerks, even the judge. Daniel had revealed himself. The mask was gone. He wasn't a loving father or a supportive husband. He was a man who thought he owned me. Lily tried to jump in then, her voice trembling as she clutched his arm. Wooey just wanted to be happy. Sarah never appreciated him, not the way I did. But her words only poisoned the air further. The room erupted with murmurs of disgust. Even those who had walked into the courtroom neutral shifted uncomfortably at her confession. Happiness. They had torn apart a family, stolen children, and betrayed blood all in the name of happiness. Margaret struck again, her timing flawless. Your Honor, it is abundantly clear. The affair, the betrayal, the attempted financial theft was all part of a scheme. And the children, pawns in their cruel game to break my client. She let the silence stretch, her words cutting like a blade. But thanks to her father's foresight, thanks to this will, their scheme is unraveling. Daniel slammed his fist against the table, his fury spilling over. You can't take them from me. They're my kids. His voice cracked with desperation, no longer powerful but pitiful. And then it happened, the words that changed everything. The judge leaned forward, his voice sharp and final. Mr. Hayes, after reviewing the evidence, including your abandonment, your affair, and now your clear financial motives, custody will be granted to Mrs. Hayes. Your behavior demonstrates you do not act in the best interests of your children. The room erupted, half in shock, half in relief. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might collapse. Custody. The word rang in my ears like salvation. My children were coming home. Daniel's face twisted with rage, a man stripped bare of power. Lily clutched at his arm, but he shook her off violently, his fury too big to contain. "This isn't over," he hissed, but the venom in his words rang hollow, empty, because everyone in that courtroom knew it was over. The fall of Daniel and Lily wasn't loud. It was humiliating. They had walked into that courtroom hand in hand, brimming with arrogance, believing they held all the cards. And now, stripped, exposed, and disgraced, they had nothing left but the ruins of their own betrayal. As the gavel struck, finalizing the ruling, I exhaled a breath I'd been holding for years. My father's will had not just saved me, it had revealed the truth. It had brought justice crashing down on the very people who tried to destroy me, and in that moment, I realized something greater than victory. I had won more than a case. I had won myself back. When the gavel fell, it was as if the entire world exhaled with me. The buzzing in the courtroom, the shuffling of papers, the murmurs from the gallery, they all melted into background noise as I sat frozen in that chair, my body trembling with equal parts relief and exhaustion. For so long, I had carried the weight of betrayal, humiliation, and fear. But in that moment, I wasn't just a woman who had been abandoned. I wasn't just a mother clawing her way through endless nights, fighting for the chance to hold her children again. I was something stronger, someone my father must have always known I could be. Margaret leaned down, her voice soft but firm, the kind of voice that steadies you when your knees are weak. "It's over, Sarah. You're free." For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself believe her. Free. The word tasted new, like air after a storm. Daniel and Lily sat slumped across the room, their confidence drained like water slipping through cracked glass. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his jaw clenched in silent rage. Lily stared down at the table, her face pale, her lips pressed tight as though she might crumble if she dared speak. I didn't give them a second glance as I gathered my things. Their voices, their presence, their shadows, they no longer had power over me. When I walked out of that courtroom, the air outside felt different, warmer, lighter. The city noises rang clear, but they no longer pressed on me like they once had. I tilted my head back and let the sunlight kiss my face, and for a heartbeat, I could almost feel my father there with me. His steady hand on my shoulder, his voice in my ear reminding me that I was stronger than I believed. His will had been more than words on paper. It had been a shield, a message of faith. He must have known life would test me, and so he left me the tools to survive, to fight, to rise. The first time I held my children again was the truest victory of all. They ran into my arms, their little hands clutching at me like they'd never let go. Their tears soaked into my blouse, their sobs muffled against my chest, but their arms wrapped around me felt like chains of love, binding me back to the life that had almost been stolen. I promised them right then, silently, fiercely, that I would never let anyone tear us apart again. No court order, no betrayal, no selfish ambition would ever separate us. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into a new life. The noise around Daniel and Lily faded into whispers. Yes, people talked, but their words no longer cut into me. They weren't about me anymore. They were about him, the man who threw away his family for greed, and about her, the sister who gambled away blood for a taste of stolen affection. They weren't victors, they were cautionary tales, and for the first time, I didn't care what the world said. Their ruin wasn't my peace. My peace came from something deeper, my freedom, and I had it back. Evenings became sacred. I filled my house with the smell of dinners my children loved, spaghetti nights, warm cookies cooling on the counter, pancakes for dinner just because they asked. I read them bedtime stories, tucked them into bed, and listened to their laughter echo through rooms that had once felt so unbearably empty. And every night, as I smoothed the blankets over them, I whispered the same words: "We are safe, we are together, and we are stronger than before." But in the quietest hours, when the house was still, I would sit by the window and think of my father. I'd imagine him there, watching from beyond, proud of the woman I had become, proud that his foresight had not only preserved his legacy, but also rebuilt his daughter's life. His will wasn't just about money or land or gas deposits, it was about faith. It was about love that endured past death, a father's final promise that his daughter would never stand defenseless. The story that began with betrayal ended with strength. The man who thought he owned me lost everything. The sister who thought she could replace me discovered that she could never destroy me. And Meath woman they both tried to shatter. I rediscovered something I had almost forgotten. I was never powerless. When the lawyer unsealed my father's will, I didn't just win back my children, my inheritance, and my freedom. I won back myself. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest victory of all.